All right, Dr. Ed Buckner, it's great to meet you in person, and certainly welcome to the Chasing Skeptics podcast. We appreciate your participation.
Well, I'm honored to be asked, and I would ask that you henceforth just call me Ed. You know, the formality doesn't work very well when I'm here in this kind of garb, so.
No problem at all. Well, Ed, the first question I'm going to start with is actually something I'm interested in because I haven't heard it. Did you grow up in a religious family? Did you have religious parents? Did they make you go to church?
I grew up in a religious family. My father was an Episcopal clergyman.
Oh, wow.
My mother was probably more pious and more religious even than he was. But I would not say that I came to my atheism in rebellion against that. I don't ever remember feeling deeply oppressed by my religion. I was president of the church youth group. I sang in the choir, which is definitely a miracle because I can't carry a tune in a bucket. And, you know, I was very involved in the church activities. I mostly took the doctrine and all that sort of thing just completely for granted. I mean, I never questioned it as a young man. I remember sitting in church thinking, you know, none of this really makes any sense. But all these people around me, everybody I know and love and respect, they all believe it. So, yeah, I guess it must be true. Yeah, I didn't say anything out loud. And then in high school, a buddy, not a girlfriend, but a buddy by the name of Bonnie Huckabee, said to me one day, I was spouting off some of the usual religious stuff. She said, Ed, you don't really believe all that stuff, do you? And I said, you know, I don't know. But my loss of religious belief, and I certainly don't consider it a loss at all, but my change and moving away from religious belief didn't come overnight. It was not a single event that caused it. It was not a reverse road to Damascus and I suddenly didn't see the light or whatever. It was just anthropology of religion course, reading some Bertrand Russell, having bull sessions in the dorm late at night at Rice University, conversations with my future wife, Diane, my current wife, but she was my future wife then, who was an atheist before I was. Lots of things led to it, and it was over a period of a number of years that I shifted from saying I'm going to be a preacher like my daddy to I'm a pushy atheist. It took a long time, but I got there.
Yeah, it's gradual. That's how, and it's interesting because I was also going to ask, like, and you kind of answered this: was your atheism caused by a lack of belief in biblical stories, a lack of scientific evidence, maybe a belief that religious people are lying to people? Or?
I don't remember thinking religious people are lying to people. I just remember thinking, I take this stuff for granted. I don't question it. I don't think about it. And then all of a sudden, I take a course in college. I talk to a buddy. I talk to others. I say, you know, think about it. What does this really mean? And the science, actually, I'm not even close to being an anthropologist. I think I only took that one anthropology course. But that maybe, of all the formal courses, that one probably connected the best in terms of making me stop and think, you know, what is this all about? Why are you saying these things? Do you really think this is true? And it doesn't really seem to make much sense. So it was not, I didn't have this huge pedestal of religious belief and then I had to knock it down. There wasn't much there, and then it was hard to sustain what little was there. I mean, it wasn't much substantial. There was a lot of edifice, a lot of superficial, but nothing very real.
That's interesting. Did you ever deal with did you ever personally deal with a fear of hell or a fear of punishment? Because I think some other atheist activists have said even people who they know who totally don't believe and have been atheists for many years, they still sometimes have a nightmare about hell or worry about hell.
I don't remember ever. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and they didn't do a lot of emphasis of hellfire and brimstone. I think technically my parents both believed in something like that, but they didn't talk about it much. My father was not a fiery preacher. He wasn't even a very good preacher. He was a pretty good pastor. He cared about his fellow, the people in the church and attending to them. But I don't remember fear of hell. I remember fear that God might catch me at something, but I don't remember it overwhelming me or oppressing me. It just was, eventually it faded away, and I don't have nightmares or concerns about it now at all. I have no fear at all of being dead. I figure when I die, it'll be just like before I was born. No, nothing. Now, I have plenty of fears about the long, drawn-out pain and prospect of a bad death. I don't mean that dying doesn't hold any fear for me, but being dead doesn't hold any fear for me.
Yeah. No, I've heard about that. So, could a God exist? Have you given up that possibility?
Technically, I call myself an atheist and an agnostic. And I say technically because normally if you say to somebody you're an agnostic, they jump to the incorrect conclusion that you just don't know, is there a God or isn't there a God? I'm an agnostic, meaning that can't be 100%, but it's sort of similar to what chance do you think this core of the moon is made of green cheese? I can't prove it isn't. I'm agnostic on the question, but only in a very narrow technical sense. I have no real or serious doubts about the lack of existence of God. I can't prove that all possible gods don't exist, but I can prove to my satisfaction that the gods most people believe in can't possibly exist. They're illogical and can't be reconciled with what we know about reality and with the problem of evil and all the rest of it.
Now, what's interesting about that, I've studied and read the Bible. I also took a religious studies course. I assume you're very familiar with the Bible. And
oh, yeah.
Sometimes there are times when I wonder, how could someone believe this? There are also times when I wonder, is it just that the person's put so much of their life into it and they don't want to go back? You know what I'm saying?
I think some of it is that, but I really think some of it is just the default. They just take for granted. They're raised in the truth. It's not in any way a logical proof of the lack of existence of a God, but demographics are among the best evidence, in my opinion, that the God who can communicate with us and tell us the truth and give us moral guidance doesn't exist, because if you look worldwide in all the different continents, every part of humanity that we know anything about, nearly everyone, and that includes atheists and fundamentalist Christians and Buddhists and everybody else, nearly everyone winds up with religious beliefs or lack of beliefs that are very similar to that of their parents and their culture. Now, could that be true if there is a God? Yeah, but not if he's a very good communicator. Not if he or she or it really knows how to tell us what that the Ten Commandments are the true bit, and then some other religion adopts an entirely different set. They're never entirely different. I mean, all human societies oppose murder in one form or another. Most of the things that we really consider important in the Ten Commandments are guidance that comes with every culture, every society, variations of it. The most basic and valuable moral lesson, of course, is, the Bible says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but every religion and culture has some variation of that, and those go back to well before any existence of Judeo-Christian ideas. So it's much, much, much more likely on the evidence that man invented God than that God invented man. Much more likely.
When we talk about people dealing with religious intolerance, have you dealt with religious intolerance?
Of course.
What kind of advice do you have for people? Because that was something I could say, and it might sound stupid now looking back, but and what also annoyed me is when people would get angry if you disagree. I've known religious people. I had a coworker that was always talking about the Bible, and they would talk about Noah's flood in particular, how it happened just like it said, and I'd say, really? So this town, this town, we're in Atlanta right now, so yeah. Atlanta was underwater, and if you really think about it, it's if you really think about it, it was underwater, and a man had a I guess he built a boat with his sons, and I would just say, and I would
That
just
was in
offer,
Kentucky, though. Ken Ham says that was in Kentucky.
but like, and I would just offer a polite, other perspective, and they would get angry and start shouting at me and threatening me with hell.
I think tolerance is an important question. I have known, not many, most atheists I know are perfectly live and let live and at ease about things, and I know literally thousands of atheists. But there are a few that are intolerant. I believe in tolerance with a small t. Now, that doesn't make any sense, but at the time of the founding of this country and before that in Europe, there were efforts to legalize toleration, where the official government, the England, Church of England or whatever, would be the preferred accepted church supported by the government, but they would tolerate or allow other religions. I'm opposed to that because you should have religious liberty, not toleration. You should have the right to believe or not believe what you wish. But on the more personal level, what you were, I think, talking about primarily, toleration is the right approach, and that's the right approach no matter what your beliefs are. If you think I'm going to hell because I don't believe in God, or you think I'm immoral, then hey, let's talk about it if you want to. If you don't want to talk about it, go on your merry way. I don't care. But if you want me to accept your ideas, then we got to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And that goes for the atheist and the fundamentalist Christian. And I have, some of my best friends are Christians. I have friends who are pretty religious, and I know people that I admire and respect who are very religious. So that does not eliminate my ability to respect or get along with or deal with somebody. If they insist that I have to accept their version, then we start having some serious problems.
Yeah. Now, if it so happens to be that there's a heaven, if it so happens to be that when we die, you go to a happy place and you're comfortable and whatever else, would that be good?
Well, it's impossible to know without knowing what the characteristics of that heaven would be. And I know the most common variation of this is it's actually a misuse of Blaise Pascal's wager that, you might as well believe in heaven and in the afterlife and God because you got nothing to lose if you're wrong, but you got something to lose the other way. And that's not true. I mean, could there be life everlasting and it not be in a lake of fire, but it still be, boring beyond question, and you can't imagine it being anything except, in effect, horrible? I can imagine. And of course, could there be a God who only values people smart enough to question his existence, and so only atheists make it to heaven? I mean, we don't know, obviously. I mean, I don't have I've seen no reason to believe there's a heaven. None of any kind. I've had a relative ask me, well, do you think heaven would be a good thing? I said, it depends on how you define it, but then there's hope for you yet. Why? I think winning the lottery would be a good thing too, but I don't think my chances are going to be improved any by saying I believe I'm going to win the lottery. It just doesn't work. You have to buy a ticket. According to statisticians like me, that doesn't even improve your chances. But that's another whole discussion.
That's a very good point, and I've wanted that too. My next question is similar to the question I just asked, but it's my favorite question to ask.
I'll just say I don't know in advance then. How's that?
I'm from New Jersey, and it was very close to New York City. And when 9/11 happened, it was a very, of course it was right there. We could see it. And the topic of Muslim suicide bombers wanting virgins in heaven, that became a talking point.
Sure.
And I only had one friend that actually was an atheist at that time. We're talking, 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And he said something interesting to me he said the Muslim suicide bombers wanting virgins in heaven, they don't even get a chance to be disappointed.
Yeah.
They don't even get that chance to be disappointed, right? And the question I asked him, and I'm going to ask you, would it be good if they could be disappointed? I mean, wouldn't it be good if they could know, look, you're not getting the virgins, you're just an idiot.
Yeah. Well, my firm convictions are that nobody will find out anything after they die, good, bad, or indifferent. and it's just about impossible for me to imagine what that would be like, and therefore it's hard to say, well, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, to what end? I mean, if they're dead, then they can't come and do any more harm. I'm certainly acutely aware of 9/11, the problems, and I'm apparently some Americans are not aware that it was a faith-based initiative, the 9/11 attack, and that these people were doing what they thought their God was telling them to do. Now, we talked about toleration earlier. I believe tolerance for Muslims is very much in order. I don't want to come to the conclusion that all Muslims want to fly planes into buildings and kill people any more than all Christians want to blow up the federal building in was it Kansas City?
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Just because a white Christian did that. So it's we have to make judgments about other people based on reality and not on what some sort of association that may or may not be a relevant bit. But honestly, I don't know whether I want people to find out after they die that there isn't anything else. I mean, I don't even think it's possible.
Many organizations of the skeptic persuasion, the atheist, humanist persuasion, they make the argument that religion causes a lot of harm. Do you make that argument as well?
Well, it does a lot of good and it does a lot of harm. And does it net cost? I had a debate at one point with a fellow in Birmingham on whether religion does more good or more harm. Yeah. And I was all prepared to give all this details about the harm that it had done, and it's done one hell of a lot. I mean, it's not hard to make that case. He didn't actually make the case based on, well, look at all these hospitals and these beautiful buildings and these cathedrals, and what he said was, you can't know. And I said, what about the guy, the debate was in Alabama. I said, what about the guy in Alabama in 1901 who said, my opponent happened to be an African American. I said, what about the guy in 1901 who said, Jesus Christ told him that white people are superior and therefore it was appropriate to put white superiority in the Constitution? And he said, well, he said that was based on his religious motivation, but you don't know. Who knows what's in somebody's heart? It's an odd position to have. I suspect that if you could somehow measure the good and the harm that's done, harm would be the predominant case, and maybe that's shifted some in more recent years. We don't tend to have, at least in the Western world, inquisitions, and we still have at least some hospitals that were built by religious and run by these hospitals also will be the ones that be the most likely to deny women the right to control their own body, and so it's complex. It cuts both ways. If you look at a typical local church, when something happens, they have community support. They bring each other pots, covered dishes and what have you.
That's good, yeah, because sometimes I will have an atheist. David Silverman went off on how religion's so terrible, and
well, I think it's pretty terrible, and I've read Dave Silverman's book, and I agree with most of it. So.
Should we maintain? We should maintain religious freedom, though.
Absolutely.
And so, what if someone wants to be outside? Should proselytizing be legal? Like, should I be able to pass out a flyer saying?
Well, there should be some limits on it because you should have the freedom to not be proselytized as well as the freedom to proselytize. So where do you draw that line? I think Dave Silverman's book was brilliant, by the way. I really enjoy it. It's well worth reading. Don't like the title much, which he knows.
What was the title?
Fighting God.
Oh, yeah.
But I would like religious liberty, but I don't want religious privilege. And I think for the most part in this country, religion still is default privileged. There's a stigma against atheism. There's a sense that if you're religious, you must be moral, you must be upstanding, you're doing good for the community. And it's not no more likely to be than if you're not religious.
That's a very good thing you brought up, which leads to my next question. A lot of people, and this really confuses me, people all the time will say, okay, we're aware of the crazy stuff in the Bible. I mean, there's so many crazy things. There's orders to kill, there's
Keep the virgins for yourself.
There's
Buy and sell slaves.
in the New Testament, there's like a dragon fighting a pregnant woman in Revelation. Why?
Thomas Jefferson said Revelations is beyond any criticism. It's just,
Question I have is,
St. John the Divine was crazy.
why do people point, you've seen people will point to the Bible, they'll say, I'm a good person because of the Bible. I do the right thing because of the Bible. Why do you think that is with all the...
Well, I think that religious leaders have for thousands of years persuaded their followers that being good is important, which it is, and that the way to be good is to do what I say. And by the way, what I say is backed up by this particular book. That's where the nonsense gets involved, is giving the power to other people. You should come to your own conclusions. We have developed as a species moral development and gotten progress and strength because we are smart enough to know to keep questioning and changing. And the evidence for this is not abstract and hard to come by. You're in what used to be a church. It's now the Atlanta Free Thought Hall. Right across the street from this is a cemetery, and there are some Confederate soldiers buried over there. And those soldiers, some of them at least, were fighting for the right to own slaves. It was taken for granted in this part of the country and taught by preachers and by leaders that slavery was a God-given institution and that it was moral. Now, even the most ardent Christian, well, there are a few exceptions, almost even the most ardent Christians say, no, slavery is immoral, we shouldn't have slavery. You can look in the Bible, and the Bible has very specific verses that support the institution of slavery. There are verses that say you should treat your slaves well and you should treat your masters well, but there are no verses that say slavery is immoral, don't do it. We have moral development. We grow as a species. We learn to treat each other better. We learn to work more effectively and cooperatively with each other. And these things are very important, very important.
That's great. That's great. You brought up atheism before. Like, what stereotypes about atheists do you want to confront and correct, do you think? Well,
all of the atheists that I know are really good looking, just like me. And all these, Derek Calandra, there are people who don't think all atheists are good looking, but they are, every one of them. There are lots of stereotypes about any group. The stereotypes about atheism that are the worst are the ones that say they're all negative and immoral and they've got no sense of humor and they don't believe in anything bigger than themselves, or sometimes a variation of a slightly different is they're like Mr. Spock. They're entirely engaged with logic, don't engage and don't understand the importance of emotion. There are lots of stereotypes and most of them are wrong, and the best way for atheists to change this is not, I love debates, but debates are not the best way to do it. Written essays are not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is for atheists, to the extent they can, to be open about their atheism, to come out of the closet. Richard Dawkins had a campaign, come out of the closet.
Yeah, campaign. Yeah.
Very good campaign. The gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual movement taught us very, very well that the thing that changes people's minds is when they know actual human beings. And one of the problems with atheism, for the last 30 or 40 years, people have said to me when they meet me, oh, you're the first atheist I've ever met. And I always say, no, I'm almost certainly not even close to the first atheist you've ever met. I'm much more likely to be the first person who ever told you they were an atheist, but you probably met lots of them. There's this stigma. There are penalties to be had, social penalties.
Can't be in government for the most part.
Well, for the most part, and it's hard to get raises and hard to get accepted as a good neighbor and all kinds of difficulties from being considered an atheist. But if, in fact, more and more, if every atheist in America would come out on tomorrow, we'd all atheists would be better off. Now, if only a few do, they may pay a heavy penalty, and so it's a tricky thing. But
that's interesting. When there are people that, obviously, a lot of atheists have a good understanding of science, and they know that Adam and Eve is not true because they've studied evolution and the Big Bang. But there are, and I haven't figured this out, and I usually ask this question, there are people similar to maybe a Ken Miller. You know Ken Miller, right?
Sure.
There are people that understand science, understand evolution, probably understand the Big Bang to the best of their ability, know what you should know, and still believe in God.
Yeah, Ken Miller is an excellent example of a reputable scientist, an effective biologist, a good guy by all accounts, who is, by his own account, a deeply, I think Catholic, but deeply religious man. You're in Cobb County, Georgia, and actually we had this controversy some years back where we had to put stickers in our evolutionary biology books warning people, and he came and testified in court. I happened to be in court that day and heard him. And he said, it feels terrible. You know, here's this book that I helped write, and it's got a warning label like a cigarette pack. How absurd is that? You know, it makes no sense. So you can be a very competent, reasonable, intelligent person and not be an atheist. But so I don't think science automatically makes you an atheist, but I think understanding science, understanding that evolution is not a dogmatic theory that you have to believe. It's a theory. It's lots and lots of evidence for it. One of my favorite things about evolution is if I talk to some creationist who tells me that on the origin of, that evolution is impossible because of the complexity of the human eye, I say, you obviously haven't read Darwin's book. Mm-hmm. In 1859, he published this book, and among other things, he talked about how incredibly complex the human eye is and how hard it is to believe that could have evolved. And then he goes on to explain why it makes sense to think that it did. And he won the scientific world over in amazingly short period of time. It was not instantly, but amazingly short, because he had evidence, because he had logic, because he had a theory. Evolution was certainly believed in or expected to be a logical thing long before Darwin, but he was the first one to really come up with an explanation of how it could have happened and how it could explain what we know about biology, about life, not just human life, but all kinds of life.
I find it funny that we, and I do believe in evolution. You know, I've read about it a lot, and it's
well, I would argue that you should not believe in evolution. You should have confidence in the theory of evolution.
But it's funny that that's how we became, and we don't even know, and some of us don't even believe it. It's like I drove my car here, and I think I took a helicopter here. You understand the analogy? Yeah. How do we? Because basically, what you've said a lot of. Yes, you're an atheist, you're an agnostic, but whether there's a God, you think probably not, but we don't know. And
I would say technically we don't know, but I think the evidence is overwhelming.
Can we be comfortable with? Because and a lot of atheists I come across, they say that as well. Like, we don't know. I mean, how do you be comfortable with? There's so much we don't know. How did we get here? How did
I think
how do we be comfortable with not knowing?
I think the answer is in the name of your show, Chasing Skeptics. I think every atheist, every good atheist, should be a skeptic, skeptical of his own or her own conclusions, beliefs, ideas, as much as anything else. And being a skeptic doesn't mean that you reject stuff without evidence. It means you don't accept stuff unless you have evidence. You accept things tentatively. So that's why I said you shouldn't believe in evolutionary theory. It's a very powerful theory. It explains everything that we can ask it to explain, and I can't see any reason at all to reject it. But it is still a scientific theory, not a piece of dogma. It is still something you should accept so long as there's not a better theory that explains stuff even better, so long as it comports with the evidence. And there's some evidence that it's struggling to comport with. I'm not saying it's 100%. So skepticism is broader than atheism, and skepticism is very important, and it means keeping an open mind about everything, including your own ideas.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I mean, if we're both very familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with people that always believed in God and went about their way and always believed in God and might have come across a starting point where they started to, as you described, like you met a friend, and if someone is at that starting point, I like to say if it's someone's first day wondering, like they've been raised, whether it's Christian in the Bible Belt of America or a Muslim in Saudi Arabia or wherever, somewhere else.
Can't be an atheist in Saudi Arabia. It's illegal, literally illegal.
But if it's someone's first day
But there are plenty
wondering,
of atheists in Saudi Arabia.
But if it happens to be someone's first day questioning, what advice do you have for them?
Well, my advice to anybody, whether it's their first day or their millionth, well, thousandth day, keep questioning, keep thinking, keep reading. Don't just read the stuff you agree with. Read stuff you disagree with on any topic, and think about it. I thoroughly enjoy debates. I do lots of debates, and my goal in a debate nearly always is to make people think, to plant some seeds of how they might not be taking everything into account. But I don't expect to win an audience over to my point of view. When I'm debating on secularism and church-state separation, I come closer to that. You know, there's just no way you can question it. It's got to be right. But in general, early doubters of any idea need to allow for the doubt and keep thinking. Keep questioning.
Keep questioning. No, that's great. That's when we look at the future, right? I mean, Richard Dawkins, and there was another book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. I forget who wrote it, but a lot of people are making the case that things are getting better. You know,
well, Steven Pinker,
right?
Who wrote Better Angels. He reports that worldwide and over the course of human history, violence is reducing, and people say, that just can't be true. I've read in the news about murders, and I know there was the Holocaust, and this was even in the 20th century, even with the horrible wars, and still, if you compare it to earlier, we're getting better.
And do you believe that? Because I mean, I might be one of those.
I have confidence that he's right.
Those news people, like especially, and I mentioned in previous interviews when we talk about like nations such as Iran or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, that where there does appear to be a lot of intolerance. But do you think things are getting better?
I'm not a prognosticator, and I don't know. I think they are, but I'm not completely confident that they are. I think we human beings have the capacity for them to get better if we'll just allow it to happen, and I do think things are getting better.
Any thoughts on Madalyn Marie O'Hair?
Madalyn Marie O'Hair, I never met her, but I have great admiration and respect for most of what she did. She lived in a different time, and she had to be very negative and a prickly pear in order to get attention and to assert rights and make a difference. So she really won some important battles, things that made a difference for us. Some of the stuff that I've read about her personally was not all that appealing, but like I said, I never met her. I succeeded her at some point, but there were a couple people in between. And so I'm a big admirer of Madalyn Marie O'Hair. I think it's a damn shame that she was murdered over somebody's mindless greed. She was not murdered because she was an atheist. She was murdered because somebody wanted some gold, literally.
Yeah. I think I read about that. No, that's terrible. Should churches have to pay taxes on the money that they get?
Of course they should.
Yeah, I mean, should it be like...
It's self-evident. We pay taxes. The Atlanta Free Thought Society pays taxes on this building and this land. We get fire services. The roads are paved in front of our building. We're part of the community. We benefit from being part of the community. So, of course, we should pay for that. And the same thing should be true whatever religious belief we had.
And churches don't have, do they not have to pay property tax?
The question is too complicated for a basic interview. First of all, there are income taxes, federal and local, and there are property taxes. The property taxes almost entirely local and state matters, and they vary. There are places where churches do pay property taxes. In the state of Georgia, they do not. The biggest difference on the income level at the national level is not whether you can avoid paying income taxes or whether you can take deductions if people give you money. The biggest difference is accountability. Most people don't realize this. IRS The American Atheist has a tax exemption. We're a 501c3 organization. You give American Atheist a couple of $1 million, be a good idea. Go ahead, do it. If you give $1 million, a couple $1 million, you can take that as a tax deduction on your income tax. You can do it if you give to American Red Cross or to the First Baptist Church. The difference is American Atheist has to account for it. They have to say where the money came from, and in broad general terms at least, where it went. The First Baptist Church says, we're not telling you. And they get away with that because it's written into the law. It's automatic. If you're a church, mosque, temple, etc., you don't have to account for it.
So they could use that money on whatever they want,
and
right?
they sometimes use it for improper political purposes and other things, and for helicopters for the pastor or whatever.
You've been in debates, and sometimes you see people will say, oh, you know, the question is like, does it matter that Stalin was an atheist, that Mao was an atheist, that Pol Pot, you know, all these evil people were atheists? Yeah. Does that matter?
It matters some, but the thing that needs to be kept in mind is, first of all, I don't blame all Muslims for Islamic horrors. I don't blame all Catholics for the Inquisition and all the rest. So you can't blame all atheists for something that some extremely horrible atheist did. And the main thing to remember, Stalin was actually raised in the Catholic Church, went to a Catholic seminary before he became an evil murdering bastard. Now, he did oppress religion in Russia and the Soviet Union, so I'm no admirer of Stalin and don't advise anybody else to be one. But he wasn't doing this in the name of atheism. If he had been, that would have been an error and a big one, a mistake. But I don't think it makes sense to judge atheism based on something any one atheist did. And if you're going to, then if you do, then you have to say, well, Adolf Hitler said, I'm continuing the work of Jesus Christ. I'm a good Christian, and everybody should. And some Christians did join him in his horrors. So it's silly to. It's not silly. It's outrageous to blame a philosophy when the philosophy doesn't encompass what's actually being done, just because that person had some connection to the philosophy or the religion or whatever it is.
In Tajikistan, they had a very, I think because Islamic fundamentalism, obviously in that country, is probably a bigger problem than it is here, and they actually started to restrict religion. I think they didn't want kids to go to mosque until a certain age, and they didn't want mosques being brought to school. There was, in the previous...
the Soviet government was doing, the Russian government?
Actually, in Tajikistan, present day,
yeah,
they do put some restrictions on religion. Do you think, now I know that that's not in the framework of America, but do you think in their exact situation it might make sense?
Probably not, but I am certainly a long way from being an expert on Tajikistan. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I do know that I believe pretty close to absolutely in religious an absolute religious liberty. Believe anything you want to believe, say almost anything you want to say, worship if you want to worship, but not in ever having government support for it. And I have problems with atheists in France who say, you know, Muslims shouldn't wear a headscarf. I think people should be able to wear headscarves if they want to. They shouldn't be able to cover their face when they're getting a driver's license photo or when they're driving. And should you have a minaret on your mosque in Switzerland? I think, sure, why not? I disagree with the Swiss on that. So it depends on the circumstances, and I'm no expert on Tajikistan.
Have you ever thought that maybe God actually, you know how, okay, a preacher will be doing something and he's an individual and he'll say this was God's plan for me. Have you ever thought maybe the Creator wants people to be skeptical and kind of like what you said before, and this is God's plan for you? Like, have you ever thought that?
No, I'd like to be able to make such a claim just because it'd be fun, but I think it's absurd. You can't very well believe in a God, or you can't very well not believe in a God and then talk about God's plan or whether you're mad at him or any of that stuff. It doesn't make any sense.
What are some of your favorite, or what is your favorite crazy story in the Bible? You know?
Oh, there are a lot of them.
Mine is Noah's Ark. I mean, yeah, but I think that's I've started to think that I should come up with a better one.
Well, there's so many crazy and so many horrible things, and it's full of baloney, and it's you know, picking out a favorite, one of the most horrible ones is where God orders the soldiers to take all the virgins for themselves and kill everybody else, the Amaleks. But I don't think modern Christians believe any of that garbage.
I like to, again, I really appreciate, you know, you agreeing to meet and to be on the show. I like to end with, do you have any questions for me or any statements you want to make, anything like that? Or?
Well, I mean, I'm honored to be on the show. I'm delighted. I know the Atlanta Free Thought Society is eager to get on with their potluck and their meeting, and we're being called time, and rightly so. And so, I don't have any further questions or comments. But thank you for the honor of doing this.
Absolutely, Dr. Ed Buckner. Thank you very much.
Ed. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.